Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is the July Q&A. It's going to be going up a little early this month, but let's just get it done. How about that? All right, so we got several questions here. D-Mac is first. He says, I wonder if you share this perspective. I have long been of the opinion that we could really use outside experts as contributors in wrestling media. There are many stories that go beyond the scope of the day-to-day wrestling content and venture into the business, legal, or medical area. In my view, having legal experts on to discuss pertinent cases or financial business experts to talk about things like earnings calls, TV deals, or medical professionals to give context behind wrestler injuries will help better inform us laypeople. Do you think we will get to the point where this happens? Edit. Semi-related, I have seen people cite the Wall Street Journal's breaking of the McMahon story as an indictment of wrestling media. Do you hold this viewpoint? Well, here's the thing. If I were a big money wrestling media site, let's say I was Wrestling Inc., that's what I would do. I would almost always reach out to people who know more about these things than I do. And I would utilize their knowledge and utilize what they do, because then it's a little bit more of an expertise thing. Like what I do on this channel is I'm a guy that knows a little bit about a lot of things, but I don't know everything about everything. So I choose which battles to pick, in terms of how I discuss things on the channel. Like there are certain things I know about law and politics and science and stuff like that, and I'll bring it in if I already know it. But when you're looking at deeper dives, yes, you definitely need to get more involved in terms of getting experts. Now, the Wall Street Journal, the reason, yes, it's an indictment on the wrestling media, but I think it's also a situation where the person who wanted to break the McMahon story wanted it to be a national news story. It would have been easy for somebody to tell Dave Meltzer that Vince McMahon has had an affair with a paralegal or something like that. But how far would that really have gotten? So they went somewhere where they knew a lot of people would see it, and then it would affect the business and it would affect the stock market. I do hold the view that it is an indictment of the wrestling media, but I also understand why a person who wants to affect WWE, and this person clearly wanted to affect the company, chose not to go to the wrestling media, but to go more to the mainstream media. So I understand why they did it, but the wrestling media sucks anyway, so whatever. Special J has a question. Probably have one later, but just a quick one. How do you feel about people sharing your videos? You do dope research and it should be seen. I wanted to know how you felt before I just started sharing your work. Absolutely spread the good word of Three Count Commentaries. I don't mind people sharing my videos. It helps me become better, and of course, it helps spread the word. Like sometimes if I say something in the video that's inaccurate, that could help. Somebody could say, hey, no, this is what's really going on, yada, yada, yada. And I could be like, oh, okay, well, I know that for context next time. But if I keep a cocoon, then not only do I not grow, but also, if I say something that is inaccurate, it never gets corrected. Like one of the history videos I did, I mistakenly said something about the wrong territory. I got reamed in the comment section about it. But it actually helped me become better because now I had to start paying more attention to the things that I said. I actually started writing things down when I do history videos. So I started writing things down to make sure I didn't misremember things. So it actually helped me become a little bit better. So, yeah, share the videos, please. Alto Johnson, he has 4 questions. 1, did you watch any pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe superhero films from the 90s till the early 2000s? I know they exist. I don't think I've seen them. Now, the Superman movies, obviously. Superman and Batman, of course. I saw all of those. But the Marvel movies, no. I did not watch. I know there's a Captain America movie from the early 90s. I have not seen it. I didn't watch a lot of the TV shows either, like the Spider-Man or the Incredible Hulk TV shows. I watched the cartoons, like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon and the X-Men cartoon. I did watch the Blade movies. The Blade movies, to me, are the reason why you even have a Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because Marvel kind of stepping into its toe into movies. Blade made the X-Men possible. And X-Men was set up the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I saw those, but some of the 90s superhero movies, no, I did not watch those. 2, how would you book a Macho Man versus Stone Cold, and why it never comes to mind? I think it never comes to mind because most people never saw Randy Savage coming back. To me, it would have been fantastic, mainly because of how now you have to look at the point in time it would have been. Savage was not the performer in 2001 or 2002 that he was before he left, or that he was in the 80s. And because he was limited in the early 2000s, I'm not sure. I still think it would have been a massive match. It would have been massive. But I don't think we would have gotten the Macho Man that we would have gotten just a few years prior. I think he had some serious injuries at that point. He had also bulked up too much because of the steroids and everything that he was doing. So I definitely think he would have been a different Macho Man Randy Savage. But I think people still would have been enamored with Macho Man Randy Savage. And that would have been fantastic just off the energy alone. And Randy would have put together a wonderful match. Of course, I would have had Steve Austin win. And I'm pretty sure since Macho Man had done jobs for DDP, he would have been okay with doing a job for Steve Austin. Macho Man had a huge ego, but he never stood in the way of business from what I saw, in terms of who he was willing to lose to. He almost never stood in the way of good business anyway. Maybe he stood in the way of bad business. 3, did you heard about Bruce Mitchell and how the wrestling media drove him out of the business? Yes, Bruce Mitchell is the guy who did the story where he questioned Brody Lee's wife and whether Brody Lee's death was COVID related. Now, I was one of the people that was very upset I was upset at the timing of it, that he sort of called her a liar and saying, look, the guy had lung problems at the time where people are dying of COVID. It's okay if it's a COVID related death, yada, yada, yada. And then Pro Wrestling Torch fired him. And because he got fired, and he'd been there forever, so this was a big enough deal to make Wade Keller fire him. And in doing so, it pretty much ended Bruce Mitchell's career. I agree with the criticisms of Bruce Mitchell, but I think he was doing something that was somewhat fair. And I'm looking at it, in retrospect. I'm pretty sure if you found my videos on the subject, you'd probably say something different. But I agree that, his timing wasn't the best, and he is essentially calling her a liar when she says that it was not a COVID death. That being said, he's asking critical questions. He's doing something that, I criticize the wrestling media for not doing all the time. And that's asking tough questions and trying to get answers. And he was trying to, but he's not going to see her medical record. He's not going to see the medical records. So, it is what it is. 4th question. Do you have any interest in doing a live stream interview with other YouTubers or influencers, followers, etc.? Sure. If the timing is right, I will certainly be willing to participate in something like that. Top dog. Would you say The Rock in the year 2000 was the most mainstream wrestler in history? Are we ignoring Hulk Hogan in the 80s? Because he was very mainstream. Hulkamania Running Wild was something else. Or Vern Gagne in the, I want to say the 60s maybe. Because Vern Gagne actually had a movie made. So it was called The Wrestler. So there's guys who have been in that stratosphere before. But Vern Gagne and his territory was never as big as the WWF. But the WWF was in New York. It was huge. So Hulkamania Running Wild was something, a sight to behold, so I would say Hogan would probably be close. Andres, what are some of your favorite big man, giant man wrestlers of all time? Well, obviously Undertaker and Kane, Sid Vicious, Diesel. I like late stage Diesel. After he powerbombed Bret Hart, he was awesome after that. He was okay before that, but that 96, late 95, mid to early 96 Diesel run, fantastic. Bam Bam Bigelow, big fan of him. Vader, tremendous, especially WCW Vader. He's tremendous. The guy was fantastic. So those a lot of those are my favorites. If you can catch some really good early Andre, Like in the early 80s, he was pretty good. Andre was really good. So yeah, I love the big man, giant wrestler, man. That shit rules, dog. It's one of the best things about the business, man. It's great. Matthew Thick, it's cut off, so it's, you know who you are. I know you mostly cover wrestling, but I've heard you mention Michael Jackson a few times, most recently in your video on the Vince McMahon scandal trial. Mr. McMahon scandal. My question is, you ever gave his music a listen? And what is your favorite album or song? Off the Wall is my choice for both. I am of the opinion that Michael Jackson is the greatest entertainer of all time. Sing, dance, anything. Michael Jackson is the GOAT. I've pretty much heard everything Michael Jackson has made. I even like the songs he made with the Jackson 5. He was like 9 years old and they were lying about his age. My favorite Michael Jackson song is Human Nature. I forget which album it's on though. My favorite album, Off the Wall, is a fantastic album. Get on the Floor with the most famous bass line, it's tremendous. How Michael Jackson was able to put his music together without playing any instruments is awesome. Because he used to think of bass lines and stuff like that in his head and come up with melodies and different things like this. He just had magic. My favorite album, it would be easy to say Thriller, because Thriller is the most mainstream album. But I think Thriller is like the peak of Michael Jackson, in terms of not only his popularity, but in terms of his creative force and his creative vision. He started going a little bit more pop after Thriller, like when it comes to Bad. He started doing a little bit more, less R&B-ish, funk-based stuff, and more into the pop, But you can't deny that what he was doing worked, But Bad and Dangerous are both very good albums. He started doing a little bit of the more rock tinged stuff at Bad, because Bad is a very rock tinged song. But I think Thriller and Off the Wall are they're neck and neck for me. Thriller and Off the Wall are fantastic. Let's see. Mr. VXG, in light of the recent McMahon controversy, if the WWE was to be sold, who would you want to buy it? If the company was going to not be run by McMahon, I think it's dead if it gets run by Disney or any of the major studios like Netflix. And they're the only people who will probably be worth buying it. Because then they realize that wrestling is of a scripted nature, and therefore you could do whatever you want. And they would try to do things, and I hate to put it like this, but they'd probably try to do things like, oh yeah, why haven't we had a gay world champion yet? And then they try to force it. They'd pick some random gay wrestler and be like, oh, you're gay. We want to talk about you being gay. You're the random gay wrestler. They have drag queen wrestlers. They do that in Mexico. And I wouldn't be that offended by a drag queen wrestler. But I would be offended at, all of that stuff being brought in just because the new owners now see that as the wave of the future. As, hey, we can do whatever we want with this entity. We can make world champions out of whoever we want. And I think that would be a mistake. That would be a huge mistake. So, do I have any particular entity that I would want to buy WWE? No. I don't have one. There are no based corporations right now, All the corporations are sort of following the same template. So if it was bought by Amazon or Netflix or Apple or whoever, I could see them just doing the same thing, Just saying, hey, the McMahons are horrible people, especially since, if they were to be sold, it'd be because, Vince dropped the stock price so much due to the scandal and everything. That depends on how far this thing goes. Then people will be like, oh, well, we get to erase their history and just basically do a whole new thing. And it wouldn't be the WWE that we know and love and grew up with at that point. It'd just be kind of like what UFC is, which is a thing on the massive budget of another corporation. And I would not be a fan of that at all. So I don't care who buys it. I don't want it sold, to be quite honest. Sell it to the grandkids. Alto Johnson, he has 6 questions. All right. 1, have you read any of the New 52 comics. Yes, I've read quite a few of the New 52 comics. Mostly I dipped in and dipped out. The Red Hood and Arsenal and Red Hood and the Outlaws was probably one of the most offensive comic books I've read in a long time. And I was into it because I liked Red Hood. So that's what I kind of went into it. And by issue, I don't know, 3, I was like, you know what? This ain't working out. I read it in trade online though. And I was like, this sucks. It's so stupid. And I wasn't really offended by the way they did Starfire. Like I became offended about that the more I read about Starfire. Because, like, again, I didn't read comic books as a kid, so I wasn't attached to that character as much as everybody else was. So everybody else was upset about the cheesecake and her banging both Jason and, the other guy and all that kind of stuff. And I was kind of like, yeah, all that's kind of tacky, but it's, when you're writing characters that are both male and female and they're on the same team, you do have to resist turning that into this dating triangle, and they didn't resist it at all. In fact, they leaned into it, and that made it very icky and very weird because you got two guys arguing over a girl, and it started in issue 1, I think. So it was ridiculous. And then later, once I kind of grew up and started reading more comics, I was in my 20s, so 30s, so I started reading comic books. But when I kind of knew the Starfire character more, and I read Teen Titans and a little bit more and stuff like that, you could see that the Starfire Arsenal relationship when he was Speedy, it was actually teased in the Teen Titans. So instead of doing that and not including Jason Todd in that at all, they just decided to add Jason to it to make it a love triangle. So it was stupid. The Scott Snyder Batman stuff, it was okay. Superman, not really my bag, but I was really interested in Red Hood. I was really interested in Green Arrow, and neither one of those worked. None of that stuff worked. New 52 was an absolute mistake, but Red Hood and the Outlaws jumps out at me because I was really interested in that series, and the art was great, but the story, there was no story really. It sucked. The new version of Red Hood and the Outlaws with Bizarro and Artemis was far more interesting and far more endearing, I think. But I really would just rather have Red Hood by himself. And they did do that at some point, and I still jumped off. So, whatever. 2, hip-hop artists from the past to today would you rank as main eventers, mid-carders, and jobbers? All right. So, in the past, I think that we all know who the main eventers would be. But you have to do it at different eras. So, in the 80s, Big Daddy Kane, Rakim, LL Cool J. LL Cool J is so underrated. People don't give him no credit. Those are the main guys. Those are the main characters. They're the top guys. Big Daddy Kane is so influential, and most people don't even realize it and how influential Big Daddy Kane was in hip hop. A lot of people it's almost impossible to talk about rap with people who know rap and not hear about Rakim. But Big Daddy Kane sometimes still manages to go unrecognized. Like, you can still hear a lot of guys who rap today, and they get their stuff from Big Daddy Kane. Biggie was actually one of them. Like, I always split rappers into like family trees, where you have the Rakim family tree, which includes like most members of the Wu-Tang Clan. But that would be Coogee Rap too. Coogee Rap would be another one. He's more of a mid-carder though, because Coogee Rap never got to the point of Rakim or Big Daddy Kane, in terms of selling records. But Coogee Rap was very influential as well, especially during the Crime Story, almost Godfather-ish like raps. So you had like Raekwon and Ghostface. That would be in the Coogee Rap camp. The storytellers, the Slick Ricks and all them. Slick Rick is another one. Nas kind of goes across the map though, because in the 90s, you would put him in the Coogee Rap category because he did a lot of the mafioso rap stuff. But he's also more in the Rakim super lyricist, dropping knowledge kind of category. And he's more of that, especially in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Like when he gets done doing all the bling shit, Want Me Back and all that bullshit. And he starts going into, by the time he's really fully mature, he's like fully in the Rakim camp. And Big Daddy Kane would be like Biggie, Jay-Z. And some of those guys like Jay-Z actually worked with Big Daddy Kane at one point. So I think those would be like the main inventors would be from the 80s. And the 90s, it would be Jay-Z, Tupac, Biggie, Nas. Nas would be more of a mid-carder because, again, he sold records and he made like culturally relevant music, but he was never a huge star. DMX would be a main eventer in the late 90s, early 2000s. Unfortunately, Ja Rule will also be there from the late 90s to the early 2000s. And that's just based off of records sold, not necessarily talent or skill, because Ja Rule didn't have either one of them as far as I'm concerned. But he sold a lot of records, so I can't deny that. In the early 2000s, of course, would be Ja Rule, would be DMX, would be Nelly, Eminem, late 90s, early 2000s. They would be the main eventers. Mid-card guys, it'd be hard to say because then I have to go into detail about, underground rappers and shit like that. C3, what was your favorite wrestling finishing maneuver that you first saw that freaked you out? I think I didn't really get freaked out by wrestling finishers. The jackknife looked like it hurt like hell though, because he doesn't do a regular power bomb. It's basically he just lifts you up and lets you go. So it's like it's like being on a roller coaster. It looked like it sucks to take, especially since so many people didn't take it well. Like the jackknife is probably the most worst looking power bomb in history, and most people didn't take it well. But it looked like hell. The tombstone, of course, was frightening because you're getting dropped right on your head. The bonsai drop was also pretty frightening because it's a big fat guy dropping on your chest. And I remember when they did it with, I think, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. When I was a kid, I was like, oh shit, Jim Duggan is dead. I thought he was dead. And I also, that fucked me up. Not because I was a huge fan of Hacksaw Jim Duggan, but it was just because, goddamn, this fat dude just jumped on Hacksaw Jim Duggan's chest. All right, so 4. What are your top 5 favorite Dragon Ball Z episodes? Oh shit. Okay, I don't know the episode titles, so I'll just tell you what happened in the episode. When Raditz announced that there were more Saiyans, that was frightening. From a story, especially when I look back on it from a storytelling perspective. Like when I was a kid, you're like, oh, there's more Saiyans. Okay, whatever. But now when you look back on it and you're like, holy shit, they had trouble with one Saiyan and now they're going to be more Saiyans. So that was one of my favorite episodes because for starters, it was the end of the fight between Raditz and Piccolo and Goku. So that was already fun. And then you get that hook later, like there's going to be more Saiyans. You're like, oh shit. The Saiyans actually showing up was fun, but it wasn't one of my favorite episodes. One of my favorite episodes during the Saiyan saga is actually when Vegeta killed Nappa, because it was sad, looking back on it. Like as a kid, you're like, whoa, he's crazy. But then you kind of like, oh, that's fucked up. Like looking back on it though, I was like, oh, that's terrible. It's terrible shit, but it set up perfectly who Vegeta was and what his mindset was. So if we leave the Saiyan saga, my favorite episode, I think most people's favorite episode of Dragon Ball period is when Goku finally achieved becoming a Super Saiyan. That's iconic. It's gotta be top 1 or 2 favorite episodes in all of Dragon Ball. So when Goku finally becomes a Super Saiyan, that's number 1. Frieza, killing Krillin, was sad as fuck. That whole thing was emotional, and they had been telling that story so long that you really kind of felt it emotionally. Let's see. You said 5. I didn't gave you more than 5 already. I love Dragon Ball, man. That's my shit. Trunks getting shot in the chest by a Cell was insane. Like I remember episodes by moments, not by episode name. Trunks, him showing up kind of fucked with me because I was like, okay, we got 2 Super Saiyans now. What's going on here? But with him, I grew to hate Trunks during that whole arc. I was like, Trunks is a whiny kind of motherfucker, you know? Like, I liked him as a heroic character, but I was kind of also kind of like, he's a bit of a bitch. And so you kind of like, when he gets shot in the chest, you're like, oh shit. You know, that's fucked up. You know, like, wow. So that was probably my favorite episodes. I have no favorite episode after the Cell Saga. You know, it's all just mumbo jumbo after that. But all my favorite episodes would probably be in the Saiyan Saga or in the Frieza Saga. It became like all transformations and shit like during Boo. You know, I was kind of like, I still love Dragon Ball, but I was just kind of like, The episodes kind of lacked story after that. 5. What wrestlers you think had their careers sabotaged or cut short by wokeness? And how would you think ever bounce back from it? I haven't seen anybody bounce back from wokeness yet, but clearly Joey Ryan, Velveteen Dream, Michael Elgin, all these guys, you know, most of them really didn't do anything. You know, maybe they fucked some fans, or they tried to fuck some fans, or fuck some other female wrestlers or whatever. Maybe they were dickheads, just bad boyfriends, bad hookups or whatever. Nothing illegal. It's not like, you know, somebody, you know, stole somebody's cards and went on a $2,000 shopping spree or whatever, or tried to, you know, molest anybody. It's mostly he's a dickhead who, you know, was a bad boyfriend, or he was a jerk. And that was it. Any serious, like, out of that whole speaking out stuff, there was very few serious criminal accusations. Even when it came to underage female wrestlers in the UK having sex with their trainers, which is absolute scumbag behavior. Unfortunately, the UK allows for them to do that shit. Now, in the United States, we don't allow that shit. And I would not allow, under any circumstance, a 16-year-old to have sex with like a guy who's like 25. That's bullshit. All right. If she was 16 and he was 19, I would say, come on, get the fuck out of here. But if he's 25 or 26, he's 10 years older than she is, only because she's underage, then I would say, you know, come on. But there was very little serious criminal activity being suggested that these guys had actually done. Now, Tessa Blanchard, I would not put in that same category, because Tessa Blanchard fucked up her own career. Yes, it was the racism that kind of, you know, skidded everything off ramp for Tessa Blanchard anyway. But she's had opportunities to correct herself afterwards. So it was, she fucked over Impact, and the way she left Impact, that was a mistake. That was a big mistake on her part. But then it was also how she treated people in WoW. You know, it was like, man, this was an opportunity, another opportunity that was given to her, and she fucked it up. So I wouldn't consider Tessa Blanchard a victim of wokeness. But there's a lot of male wrestlers who are victims of wokeness. And the most that you'll probably be able to find is they're bad boyfriends. You know, they're bad hookups. They're not very nice guys, or they're hornballs. You know, they want to fuck everybody and fuck everything and everything like that. It's kind of like, okay, so what? Either you want to be fucked or you don't. You know, you're an adult. Don't act like a child. 6. What 10 actors or comedians you used to be a fan of but not anymore? I can't think of any. Like, almost everybody that I thought was funny, I still think is funny. You know, I can't really think of anybody that I was a fan of that I'm not a fan of anymore. Because even though, you know, your tastes change, like, I don't watch as much of the same stuff as I used to, I still find the same things funny as what I found when I was a kid. So I don't really have any actors that I used to like that I don't like anymore. I don't have any, you know, so I really don't have any. I don't have one. So it's hard to answer that question, really. So all right, let's see who we got here next. Darren Miles. He's got 12 questions. Let's see. 1, how do you feel about young adults in their early to mid 20s or even late 20s or 30s still living with their parents? I think in the modern economy, you got to do what you got to do to survive. When I was a kid, it was a big deal because you rarely saw it. But now that I'm an adult, I realize, especially since I learned more about the world, that, you know, I've seen Hispanic parents do it. I've seen Jewish parents do it. I've seen Arab parents do it. I've talked to Arabs, guys who were going for master's degrees, still lived at home. And it was because American culture teaches you that you need to move out at 18 and be independent and all that kind of stuff. Those cultures don't believe that. And so they're kind of like, you're not married, stay at home, help your parents, help your siblings. And you see that and you say, like, that's so much better, because if you have a decent job but you stay with your parents, you get to stack up money. You get to, you're limited in the things that you can do, because those are, very close knit families, and you can't just bring a girl over and shack up in the house. But you financially, you take on less responsibility, but you spread out your responsibility. Like if you're out on your own, you're responsible for paying your own rent and all that kind of stuff. And that may work for some people, but it doesn't work for most people. Like you see so many people struggling because they're trying to go out in the world, work on Walmart for $9 and, have their own apartment or something like that. It's like, no, it's probably not going to work out for you, baby. You probably need to stay at home. So I'm fully in the camp that if you can stay at home, you probably should, especially in today's economy. You probably should stay at home. If you absolutely got to get laid, splurge on a hotel room. But if you don't make a lot of money, stay at home. Especially if you're unmarried, you don't have any kids, stuff like that, stay at home. Your parents probably need it, especially if they're retired or if they're injured and they can't work, they probably need it. But most importantly, and I see this as the biggest problem, especially from people that I know, is that you're putting your parents in a worse position if they have to take care of your household and their own. My brother went through this, where he went off to college and he had this attitude. I'm never coming back. But every weekend, can I borrow? Can I have? Can you buy me some food? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it's like, okay, so now we have to take care of you and the house. I have to help mom with the bills because she can't work. But now we also have to ship money to your ass because you too proud to come home. And there's so many people who deal with that. Like when you have mom and dad helping to pay your fucking car note, you're not independent. Who cares if you have your own apartment? Your dad is helping to pay your fucking rent. Your dad is helping you pay your fucking car note. You better off just staying at fucking home. That way dad can pay the mortgage. Your ass can be under the roof. And if he still needs to help you with your car note or whatever, you can save money and pay it your fucking self. I would much rather people stay at home and help their parents, because at least that's a more useful of their money, than go out in the world and get in over their head and then mom and dad have to bail them out. Because then you're putting more financial stress on mom and dad by being out there in the world without food, without shelter, and no goddamn support or foundation. Now they're taking care of you. They're paying for 2 households. I'd rather them pay for 1 household with you in it than 2 households with you being out there fucking around or whatever. So I'm all for it. And I understand the world economy. It's tough. And I've seen cultures do it. It's only Americans that think that shit is normal, to put 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds out there working. It's like, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. All right, 2. What is the origin of cancel culture? Well, the origins of cancel culture, you can stretch that back to blasphemy laws, where you used to get banished for committing adultery, blaspheming against God, being a heretic, being a non-believer, all sorts of cultural things that people didn't really like. Modern cancel culture is just basically an extension of that. You offend people. That's what all blasphemy laws are, is you offend. It went from an offense towards God to an offense towards society. Now we're going to kick you out of society for offending society. And what offends society changes over the generations. You used to be able to, smack women in public. There was comic books where you could find where women are hysterical and the superheroes would smack her, like smack. Sorry to have to do that, ma'am, but now if she's hysterical, you can't do that. You used to see that all the time in old movies. Women would be hysterical and they'd get mouthy with a guy and the man would smack her. And she would be like, oh, and he would be like, sorry about that, but you were out of your mind. And now today that'll get you, get you canceled. You can't do it anymore. There's positives and negatives to it. I think we're seeing most of the negatives. But when you look at the way when they started passing laws, I think civil rights acts and stuff like that were like the legal justification for cancel culture. Now you can't discriminate against anybody. And so now discrimination, even on a cultural level, has become worthy of scorn. So 3, what are your thoughts about January 6th? It's nonsense. It seems like a 2 movies, 1 screen situation where most of the videos I've seen of January 6th are, people walking around in the Capitol building. They're not setting fire to anything. They're not burning anything. They're not tipping anything over. It's just Democrats being hysterical. But then there's other videos of maybe other parts of the same protest where people are banging the windows, they're climbing the structures, they're getting into it with Capitol Police. To me, it's not nearly the insurrection that the Democrats claim it was. It was more of a riot, and people shouldn't riot. I think that Democrats are using the extreme language of insurrection like it's a terrorist takeover or something like that. That's just political theater. None of those people are really being charged with insurrection. Almost none of them were armed. Maybe some people had guns because they carry guns all the time anyway. But nobody, for starters, storming the Capitol building isn't going to take over the government anyway. So it doesn't make much sense to do that. Secondly, even if it was successful, what happens? You still have Congress. You still have the senators. You still have... It doesn't work that way. We're going to try to get them to overturn the election. It's like, what? They don't even have that authority. So it makes no sense to me. But sure, it was... Some people had violent confrontation with police on one side. But once some of those people were in the building, they didn't damage any property. I think somebody stole something. That person was rightfully arrested or whatever. But other than that, I don't know. It seems like much ado about nothing, especially when Democrats spent an entire summer being okay with riots. It's like, so what? People rioted. And they didn't destroy too much of property in terms of the Capitol building and anything. 4. Why does the black culture glorify and celebrate pimps? I think pimps became a symbol of cool, of people who are cool, because pimps dressed well. Pimps always had money. When you look back in the 60s and 70s, pimps, before it was the drug dealers, pimps were drug dealers too, by the way, but they had gold rings, they had fur coats, they had expensive glasses, platform shoes, they drove Cadillacs. So it was basically like whoever has money in the black community became the cool guy. And Pimps just happened to be that guy. And then because he was male, he had a flock of women with him. That was another thing that people was kind of like, oh, he's controlling women. He's got money, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, it's basically a status symbol. Being a pimp became a status symbol. So sure, we could say culture pushed it because there was started to be a lot of books and movies and stuff like that pushed pimps. And that was a mistake. I think it really damaged the black family. But at the same time, it was all about money. And if you know anything about sexual relations, if a guy has money, he has more access to women. And it doesn't matter how he got it. Women don't care too much if he's a drug dealer or a pimp. If women cared about that kind of stuff, it never would have been popular anyway. The guy would have been considered scorn. But because women don't care how a guy makes money as long as he has it, pimps became popular because it became an easy way to make money, or people perceived it for it to be an easy way to make money. 5. What is your opinion on porn or video game addictions? I wouldn't say I had a video game addiction, but video games are something that you could lose a lot of time in. Especially if it's a good game, or you consider it to be a good game, or if it's a multi thing where you could play like 3 or 4 of your friends, it becomes you do get socially addicted to things. Alcohol is one of them. Some people don't drink when they're on their own. They drink only with other people, so they're constantly trying to get other people with them. And video games can be one of those things too. But I think it became worse when you could play games with other people across the globe. So now your friend has to go to work. Okay. Not that I'm not going to play because my friend's not here. Now I can play with anybody, So it seems like it's an addiction, but really just really bad habits. And I think porn is another one. It's one thing for it. When I look at addiction, it means that you have a physical reaction to it. I have never met or seen anybody who has a physical reaction to not being able to watch porn or not being able to play video games. Everything else is just a really bad habit, And some people will say that addictions are, habits that you have in your mind. And to me, I'm like, well, then some people will say that stealing is an addiction because there are people who are, they compulsively steal. It's like, I wouldn't say that's an addiction. I would say that's a really bad habit, and, kleptomania, I wouldn't call it an addiction. So I wouldn't consider that people who are obsessed with porn and video games to be addicted to those things. I think that they're just really bad habits that they have no control over. They still probably need therapy in order, because whenever you have something that you have no control over, you probably should, undergo some kind of therapy to get it under control. But I don't believe people are addicted to porn or video games in the same way they're addicted to cigarettes and drugs. I wouldn't put those same things in the sex, maybe. Porn, I don't know. I don't think so. 7. What are your thoughts on Shane Douglas throwing the NWA title on the floor? I think that it was a great launching pad for ECW. What better way to launch a rebel wrestling promotion than the explicit rejection of tradition? What better way to say to everybody, we're doing something new, than rejecting the old? It's the best way to deal with doing something new. We're going to get rid of the NWA. If I was in the NWA, I'd probably be pretty upset. But since I was 7 when it happened, 8 maybe, I was kind of like, I didn't hear about it until 1996, so well after it happened. So, looking back on it, it was a great launching pad for ECW and what they were trying to do in creating a rebel wrestling promotion that breaks from tradition and does something different. It had that traditional basement, that traditional foundation, but they're going in a wildly different direction. So fuck this NWA title. 8. If you are a wrestler, what era would you wrestle in? If I was a wrestler, I would want to wrestle in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, because it seemed like it was becoming a little bit more corporate. They were starting to clean things up. Vince was going through the steroid trial, ring boy scandal, all that kind of stuff. A lot of the scuzziness of the 80s, even though it was probably a lot more fun because you were a wheeling dealing pro wrestler. You were more likely to get fucked over on your paydays in the 70s and the 80s and stuff like that. As things became a little bit more professional, especially when WCW got bought, the boys were being paid more money. So the creative was very cartoonish, but you were being paid and you were getting decent to good crowds. So I would definitely want to look at that point in time. Also, some guys had bad habits, drugs, alcohol, stuff like that. That's what led to a lot of the deaths, even though people think it's steroids. It wasn't steroids. A lot of the guys who were doing steroids, some of them are still alive. But the guys who were doing steroids and cocaine and drinking, those guys are dead. Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, British Bulldog, not Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, Roddy Piper, the British Bulldog, Ravish Rick Root. They weren't just doing steroids. They were drinking a lot. They were snorting cocaine a lot. Those guys are the guys who are dead. The guys who ran their bodies into the ground doing that stuff. So I would have wanted to come after that. I would want to start 92 and maybe become more mature in the mid 90s. So 95, 96. Cause then you're right there in the smack of things in 98 when it blows up, in 97 when it blows up. You're right there. You've been in the business for a little while, so people kind of know who you are if you've been bouncing around in WCW or the WWF. And you may be able to get a hardcore Holly-like run out of it, maybe. 9. What's the state of the NWA? NWA, I don't know if I see any growth from the NWA. Billy Corgan seems to be interested in that old school wrestling stuff, which is fine. It's what the game is missing. But they drop storylines so just willy nilly, and the roster is in such flux where you're never really sure who's there and who's not, what their contract status is. Like, I'm never sure of who's going to be there next week in the NWA. Camille is doing a good job with Kylan King. They're doing something that's very good. I'm not a fan of Trevor Murdoch being the champion again. I've said that, but NWA kind of went off the rails a little bit with the whole people drinking blood, and now they got a guy in a gimp mask. They've stretched it out to 2 shows now. I really don't even watch NWA USA. I probably see clips of it at the most, but I don't watch it. So the state of the NWA is they're slowly progressing, I think, but it's still small, independent wrestling promotion. I'm glad that it's a wrestling promotion and not a governing body, because that would be stupid. But I definitely think they need to spread out and maybe do some more partnerships. I think they had something with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. They need to go back to doing stuff with them. Maybe they need to do some more, and that's just to get into households on television, because Championship Wrestling from Hollywood still comes on TV. It comes on what was this? It's public access TV, kind of, in Detroit. I don't watch it. I don't have time to. Do some stuff with OVW. Do some stuff with Reality of Wrestling. There's some smaller promotions they can work with. But I don't know. Corgan is in a tough situation. 10. Where the hell is Dolph Ziggler? Wasn't Dolph Ziggler on Raw? I think Dolph Ziggler's on Raw this week. I think he was in that Battle Royal. I think he gave him some time off after the whole NXT run. 11. Do you think Mr. McMahon is overheated? Do we mean overhated? I don't know what the right amount of hate would be. I think that Vince gets blamed for a lot of things in terms of wrestling that he probably had nothing to do with. Socially, I think that he gets a lot of heat for things that people just believe he did without any evidence. Like a lot of this stuff, if you really think about Vince McMahon and you say, is there any direct evidence that he did any of this stuff? Most of it is no. There is no direct evidence he did anything. There's no direct evidence he knew anything about the Ring Boy scandal. There was no direct evidence of him selling steroids to the wrestlers, despite the fact that people believe both of these things. There's no direct evidence that Vince McMahon paid off anybody to get Jimmy Snuka out of a murder case. There's no direct evidence of Vince McMahon raping Rita Chatterton. There's just no direct evidence of Vince McMahon doing anything with this $3 million NDA, at least as far as we know, time of recording. We don't know. There's almost no direct evidence of Vince McMahon doing anything untoward socially. Now, in terms of wrestling business, yes, there's a plenty of stuff that Vince did that we can actually look at and say, yeah, we can see that he actually did do this. We can see him run in other people's towns. We can see him snatch up other wrestlers and tell them not to go back to work, like he told Hulk Hogan and on Junkyard Dog, basically to quit in the middle of their run. Yeah, we can look at some of that stuff and say, okay, this is direct evidence that Vince did some fucked up stuff. But then we look at it and we just try to act like Vince is the devil, where anything that happens in the world is Vince McMahon's fault. If it happens in wrestling anywhere, it's got to be Vince's fault. And it's like, no. A lot of the territories died because the owners got old, and or the economics of their territory changed. Bill Watts was a victim not just because of Vince taking his top star, but because the economics of his territory changed. People are not told that, though. They just told Vince killed the territories, and they just be like, yeah, Vince killed the territories. It's like, well, let's just chill on that. Oh, I skipped one of your questions. Sorry. It said the question was, is America in a mental health crisis? I think you have to ask the question of what mental health means. If you mean that we see a heightened sense of people who claim to have mental health problems, then yes, especially the transgenderism. But I think that's mostly cultural spread, because there's very, very, very few people who have dysphoria, which is, they literally believe that something is wrong with their body, that they don't want to have breasts, that they don't want to have penises. There are some people who believe that, and they have a certain, I don't want to call it a psychosis, but they know they have mental health problems. It's just like somebody who has depression. And they know they have depression. Maybe they deny it, but they should go to a hospital because they have depression. It's one thing to be sad, it's another thing to be depressed. But you see there's a lot of incentives to now saying that you have a mental health problem and not having to take any kind of medications, without having to go to any hospitals, without having to talk to a real doctor. A lot of it is bullshit. So do we have a mental health crisis? Probably not. I think what we have is people see that there are social benefits to saying you have a mental problem, and then therefore they will say they have a mental problem. That's just my opinion. 12. Will CCW ever get bought out? Hopefully. Hopefully we can get it closed. CCW fucking sucks. Keith Bearcat Lee. Will my Thunderdome era hero and cutie, Keith Bearcat Lee, ever be champion at AEW? It's going to be very tough because they keep overloading the roster, but I think he will eventually become a champion. What kind of champion? Hard to tell. WG Phil, if you were to do a storyline to retire John Cena, how would you book it? That's a good question. I think that a hero like John Cena, you could have two options. You either have he's vanquished by the most evil bad guy that you could have, or he passes the torch. And I think you should go the pass the torch route, where we have another huge babyface who eventually takes up John Cena and lifts him up. Somebody maybe who even idolized John Cena. And they put him out to pasture. I think that's the best way to do it, because you don't want to denigrate John Cena. And WWF, despite the fact that most people would deny this, it's a babyface promotion, which means that it's unlike other wrestling companies that has a lead heel. WWE has always been about a lead babyface. So you need to replace John Cena if you're going to push him out of the way. Roman Reigns clearly wasn't going to be the guy, so they turned him into the top heel in the promotion. Now, he may still end up being a top babyface when he eventually turns, but I definitely think that Cena needs to get put out to pasture by another top babyface, and it needs to be a storyline where, it's Cena and his legion of Cena fans versus this new guy who's bubbling under the surface and his new legion of fans. It needs to be similar to Rock and Hogan, so you need to get somebody who's on Cena's level without having wrestled Cena before, and Cena to beat them and put their arm in the air and all that kind of stuff. Therefore, because if you do it with a heel, it doesn't really translate as well. You got to do it with another babyface. So I don't know who that would be though. Especially looking at the roster, and I think it's too much to give that to like a Braun Breaker or somebody like that. I mean, he's a young guy. All right, next question. 2. If a retired wrestler were able to restore their youth or revived, which wrestler would you pick and which storyline would you give them? Oh God, that's a good question. It would be easy for me to just say Undertaker, but we don't really need Undertaker in this generation anymore because I don't think he would be booked correctly. And that's really the thing that I'm thinking of is a lot of the legends that we had, it was because of the booking, not necessarily because of who they were as a performer. It would be a situation where, would they get the same booking again? And the answer would be probably not. If I could dip any wrestler into youth and bring them, maybe drop 15 to 20 years off their career, it'd probably be AJ Styles. Because I think, his booking would definitely improve if he was younger. Shawn Michaels, was another one. It would be easy for me to just say all the guys that I love. Randy Savage, Mr. Perfect. But I don't think they get the run today that they got in the past. I just don't believe it. I don't think the booking is there. I don't think the people at backstage care enough about this shit to meticulously book a storyline that keeps their characters in order. And, it's not the same business today that it was in their heyday. So, 3, out of all the WWE talents who went to AEW outside of being released, who had the biggest chance in the main roster, title or not? I'm guessing who of everybody who got fired had the biggest upside. I still believe it's Karrion Kross. I truly believe that. He's I think mid-30s, I think. So that probably was one of the reasons why they got rid of him, was his age. I think he had the biggest upside if they had used him properly. I think they fucked it up from the beginning by bringing him in while wearing the NXT belt and then pinned him with Jeff Hardy. That was stupid. Could he have gotten over if they had done vignettes first? Yes. If they had done vignettes where he did the TikTok and all that stuff and you let it build. I don't necessarily believe that he needed to have Scarlett with him. I'm not one of those people who, he fucked up the moment he didn't have Scarlett. Like, no, it's not necessarily that, Scarlett. It was the lack of buildup. He was just thrown out there like just another guy. Even with all the mask and the straps and everything, if you'd have worked that into his gimmick, it would have been fine. But when it just came out of nowhere, people was kind of like, what is this? And that's why when it was going on, I was saying people must not remember Demolition. They wore those kinds of masks and the straps and everything. People didn't think they looked ridiculous. People loved Demolition. People knew who they were too. People knew who Bill Eadie was. People knew who, goddamn, what's his name? He was Crusher Khrushchev in Mid-South. People knew who he was. Well, the hardcore wrestling fans knew who he was. People knew that it was going to be Karrion Kross, but the presentation was so fucked that it just wasn't going to turn out right. I think he's the number one guy that I could think of that, outside of being released, had a huge upside. Keith Lee, if he'd have gotten in shape and stayed in shape, but it seems to also been some outside the ring stuff, maybe attitude issues that they've said. They always say that kind of stuff too, though. They always say guys have bad attitudes, but sometimes guys have bad attitudes. Guys are disagreeable. I know men. If a man doesn't want to do something, he's not going to take it on the chin, especially if he doesn't feel like he has to. If he feels like he's got a big upside, he's going to try to protect his gimmick, his ego and stuff like that. So a lot of guys who have quote unquote bad attitudes, I believe it because I know men have bad attitudes about shit they don't want to do. Especially if what you're trying to get them to do is stupid. Keith Lee was doing something stupid. So yeah, he had a bad attitude, of course. Why wouldn't he? He got told to be Bearcat. Okay, 4. Top 4 Rey Mysterio attires for his 20th anniversary coming up. The Flash. I love when he did the Flash. That was fantastic to me. That and Captain America. The Joker Mysterio, it didn't last long enough. It was fun though. Of course, the Halloween Havoc versus Eddie Guerrero with all the question marks. We need to bring some of that stuff back. Like, bringing back the question mark as being part of his logo. Like, that would be fantastic because it fits into the Mysterio, King of Mystery. That's what his name means. I loved all that. I loved the superhero stuff. The WrestleMania 22, he did sort of the Aztec with the headdress and everything. I'm surprised he ain't never done that again. The worst is obviously when he did the Silver Surfer because he was just painting himself silver. It was awful and it looked like shit. I really wish he hadn't done that. Mr. VXG, what is your opinion of all the cosplay that is in wrestling today? Gimmick stealing is nothing new, but today's wrestlers are plagiarizing promos, even classic matches, practically move for move. It's more than playing homage now. Yeah, I hate it. I hate that they're now starting to be cover bands. CM Punk and FTR basically doing Bret Hart matches move for move, angle for angle. It's awful. I get it. I get why they would do it, but come on. Come on. It's the dressing up, the playing as your favorite wrestler is already bad enough. But now these guys are just, the whole doing the match move for move is ridiculous. I cannot stand that new trend in wrestling. It's absolutely awful. Oh boy, we got a lot of questions left. We might have to do like a part 1 and a part 2. This might end up being 2 different videos. DeAndre Dukes, what are your favorite moments from the Ruthless Aggression Era from 2002 to 2008? Considering, and I'm not going to be honest, most people who follow this channel know that I was not watching wrestling for most of this. So I didn't start watching wrestling again until 2005 or 2006 or somewhere in that area. After WrestleMania 21. I was a big fan of the Batista Evolution storyline, basically because I missed when they did it with Randy Orton. I got to be there for most of it with Batista. Even though, again, I wasn't watching weekly. I got to go back and watch the Batista angle, and it was really fun. Because it was the closest angle to what I was coming back into it, the closest angle to it, because I really enjoyed the Hell in a Cell match between Batista and Triple H. It's one of my favorite Hell in a Cell matches ever. It was so much fun. And I enjoyed all three of their matches, to be quite honest, but the Hell in a Cell match was tremendous. I wasn't really a huge fan of Cena during this era at all. Or it's really, I liked Randy Orton, but he was a bit of a dickhead in terms of he wasn't a really good babyface. But I enjoyed his feud with The Undertaker. I enjoyed that time where Undertaker and Kane were wrestling guys like Mr. Kennedy and MVP on SmackDown. I love that stuff. Like one of my favorite matches from that era is Undertaker versus Mr. Kennedy. I think I forget what kind of match it was called. It was one of these Undertaker special matches where he busted Kennedy open and he was bleeding all over the place. It was crazy. I think that match might have ended in disqualification. But they had a match at No Mercy. I forget what year that was. It was really good. No Mercy 2006, I believe. Because it was really good. I enjoyed Rey Mysterio winning the world title. I thought it was fantastic. The booking of him as champion wasn't very good. But him winning the world title was great. It was a fantastic story. He did it, for his friend, King Booker. Everything that involved King Booker was awesome. Booker T finally becoming WWE World Heavyweight Champion was fun. Especially since it was like, maybe 3 or 4 years too late. But, it was great. The King Booker run was so much fun. The Rey Mysterio as a top act was very fun. I'm a huge fan of Rey Mysterio. Not a huge fan of Shawn Michaels and Triple H during this time. Am a big fan of Shawn versus Vince McMahon. That whole angle. Do-Rag Vince when he was the ECW champion. Battle of the Billionaires, all that kind of stuff. So the Ruthless Aggression Era had some really fun stuff in it. I just did not pay that close attention to it in the early 2000s, so I really wasn't that into it. 2, are you a fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Absolutely. Now, the thing is, I have a hard time sitting through the cartoon series, because I've been trying to watch the 2012 cartoon series. I got through like 2 episodes and never went back to it. It's not that I didn't like it, it's that I don't have a lot of time. So, but I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I have comic books. I have the movies on DVD. The Michael Bay, are they Michael Bay movies? The Michael Bay movies. I actually didn't hate them. I think they did a good characterization of the turtles. They look like monsters, which probably wasn't the best thing for them. Especially since they had always been drawn as being sort of cutesy turtles. And he created these monstrosities, but I didn't mind how he characterized the boys. I didn't mind that part. I don't think they told a good story, but I didn't mind the characterization of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the Michael Bay films. The classic comics are cool. I don't like the fact that they have tails though. Like it just seems like they have penises. Like it's so weird. But I have quite a bit of the IDW run of the comic books. I'm going to go through the cartoons eventually. I haven't seen the 87 cartoon since I was a kid, so I may have to go back through that. But I love the movie, especially the first movie. It is still a classic. I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. 3, have you watched Invincible? What are your thoughts about it? I did a video on Invincible already. 4, do you have any good memories from high school? I dropped out of high school in 9th grade, believe it or not, so I didn't finish high school. 5, with the news of Jeff Hardy's DUI charges, what rules would you make regarding the situation if you were running a wrestling promotion? I think Tony Khan did a good job of saying that he has to go to rehab and suspending him until he finishes rehab. But it wouldn't even be 3 strikes. He got 20 years of trouble. If he got another DUI, I would just can him. Just get rid of him. But there's going to be people that want you to be more sympathetic towards Jeff. I, myself, if I was running a wrestling promotion, I would say, look, Jeff's been doing this for 20 years. We can't deal with it. But you also have to realize that when it comes to Tony Khan, he also has Matt. So what do? You fire Jeff, you piss off Matt leaves, or Matt refuses to resign or whatever. What do you do with Matt? Because he was waiting on Jeff in order to really to save his career. So now if you fire Jeff, you might as well get rid of Matt too. So you have to think about that. Let's see. Which era of wrestling do you think you can succeed in to become a star? If I was a wrestler and had put forth the effort, I think I probably would have been a star in the 80s, because you would have been able to travel more and learn more, and you probably would have become better because you would have had to perform in front of different audiences, and your competition would have been different. But I think that I'm good enough at being funny that I probably would have worked in any generation, but I'm not big enough to be a wrestler. I'm short. So I'm only like 5'8". So even if I packed on muscle, I still wouldn't be that big. I look like a roid freak at that point. 7. What moment from WCW 2000 has been attached to your mind that you always can't forget? Jeff Jarrett laying in the middle of the ring. I'll never forget that. That was one of the worst things in the history of the business. That was awful. That was one of the worst things in the history of the business. It was so embarrassing. It was embarrassing beyond belief. The TOD. What do you think about if things go bad for Vince and he is asked to step down? Instead, he goes scorched earth and sells everything he owns and buys out the rest of the shareholders, goes private, fires everybody, goes out for the carton of milk and some smokes to his whole family. He will live poor, claiming he grew up poor and is okay going out poor, having lived a better life than 1,000 men and will go out my own way. Works until he dies, and in his will, he leaves the company to, he leaves it to Stephanie. He's still going to leave it to Stephanie. The thing is, I think people have this idea that Vince is going to buy everybody out. Look, he's dealing with major corporations. Their asking price is going to be a little ridiculous. All right. I think if he was to try to buy the company back, he'd need financial backing. He doesn't have that kind of money independently. That's the thing that people don't realize, is his money is tied up in WWE stock. So he's going to need some financial help in order to buy the company back, in order to get it private again. So that means probably one of his shareholders would probably have to partner up with him to buy the company and make it back public. Make it back private. That would cut into his control of the company. Then it'll probably be 50-50? If that, nah, he probably wouldn't want to do that. I would love for him to try it though. I would love for Vince to say, well, I'm going to buy myself out. I'm going to buy out 80% of the fucking company and try to coerce everybody else into to selling. That would be fun. It would be a fun thing to see him try to do, because it would be incredible to see him attempt something so ballsy, especially at almost 80 years old, because that's a financial fight that he's going to be dealing with for a long time. Alto Johnson, have you ever clashed with Solomonster on Twitter? No, I clashed with Solomonster through email over 10 years ago. Me and Solomonster, it was so long ago, I barely remember the details, but I do remember sending in an email to his show. I didn't quite like the response that I got, because he gave me one of those, let me tell you something, son, promos. And I was like, what the fuck? Who the fuck this guy think he is? And I sent him another email and he didn't read it. And I sent another one, because he didn't read the one I sent my response, and he didn't read that. And I sent another one, he didn't read that one either. And I was kind of like, all right, fuck this guy. But it wasn't nothing major. It was so long ago, I don't remember it. So, but I remember sending him an email, and I remember listening to the show when he read the email, but I don't listen to his show anymore. So we haven't had any cross words, so I don't follow him on Twitter. So no, it's not really a thing. Prince Noctis, why don't you talk about wrestling video games? Are you not interested in gaming? If you are, what are some of your favorite wrestling video games? I don't play video games that much anymore. I couldn't tell you the last game I played, wrestling game. It might have been WWE. Whoa, shit. It was on Xbox 360. That's the best I can tell you. I haven't played a wrestling video game in a long time. I played the RPG like game that they have on the mobile phone. That game was fun. I forget what it was called. I played it. I intensely played it for like 4 or 5 days. And then I gave up on it. It's not the card game. It's the one where you actually do moves and stuff. It's like an RPG game where you pick your wrestlers and they have their attributes and you can pick their moves and stuff. I found that game to be pretty fun. I got pretty far and I got bored with it. It started eating up a lot of memory on my phone, so I got rid of it and just never re-downloaded it. But as a kid, I loved wrestling games. WWF Raw, In Your House, WrestleMania, the arcade game, WWF Attitude, WCW versus NWO Revenge, WrestleMania 2000, which I think was the peak of that kind of game. Even though, because WCW versus the World and WCW versus NWO Revenge, those set new standards for wrestling video games with the grappling and all that kind of stuff. Those games were very, very good. The problem that we had with those games were the big blocks, the big blocks with the grapples and everything, but those games were great. And WrestleMania 2000 was sort of the peak of those games. But SmackDown, especially with that game where you had the endless storylines where you could play like I played for like 40 years on one of those SmackDown games. And you could just keep going and going and going and going. That game was incredible. But when they did that cross between WWE and Mortal Kombat, which is, WWE in your house, I'm surprised they didn't do that again. Those games should always exist, as far as I'm concerned. Where Shawn Michaels literally throws a sucker punch and Undertaker hits you in the head with like a literal tombstone. We should have those games all the time. That's great shit. With the mobile games, I heard WWE mobile games make a lot of money. That mobile game that I played, I can't remember what it was. It wasn't the card game though. I forget what it's called, but it was fun. It's just I played it intensely for a while and then lost interest in it. But I'll talk about the games when I start gaming, but I haven't gamed in a long time. Super AJ Styles Nick, worst year in WWE's history, 1995. 1995. Creatively, the company was in shambles. This was right after all the scandals happened. Vince was on trial for steroids in 94, I believe. He got accused of rape in 92. Ring Boy scandal happened in the early 90s as well. He was trying to clean up the image of the company. He was going in a different direction creatively. Hogan was gone. Savage was gone. DiBiase was gone. Or DiBiase was on his way out, rather. Mr. Perfect was still hanging around, but he was mostly phased out. Mostly everybody from the early 90s was being phased out. The British Bulldog was gone during this time. No, he did the Allied Powers with Lex Luger, then he was gone. They were the New Generation era. Started earlier in 93, I think, when Hogan left. Yokozuna kind of starts spearheading the New Generation era. And people wasn't really a big fan of it because then a lot of here comes Yoko and here comes Luger. And people are not fully on board with. But 95, everything sucked. Survivor Series sucked that year. WrestleMania sucked that year. SummerSlam was terrible that year. Everything sucked in 95. There's a lot of memorable stuff that happened, because Razor Ramon was really good. Shawn was really good. Brett was really good, but they just couldn't. Undertaker was okay, They just couldn't put everything together. 96, almost immediately at the beginning of 96, things started turning around. But 95, awful. So, Parkin Hunt is here with the last set of questions. 5 questions in all. Parkin Hunt says, first question, what are some of your favorite books that you've read? Good question. I am a big fan of Fahrenheit 451. I'm going to give you some of my favorite fictional books and some of my favorite non-fictional books. Fahrenheit 451. Excellent book. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Excellent book. I really love that book. Both of those books are by Ray Bradbury, by the way. I'm a big fan of some of the Donald Goines novels. For instance, the one that DMX made a movie out of, Never Die Alone. I really like that book. I really like the Michael Moorcock Elric Chronicles. I love the Elric Chronicles. I'm trying to find as many of them as I can to read them. I also like The Eternal Champion by Michael Moorcock. I enjoyed all of those. The John Carter series from Edgar Rice Burroughs. I loved a lot of those books. I haven't read them all. I read, I think, up the first 4 or first 5 of the Mars series from Edgar Rice Burroughs. What are some more fictional books that I've read? It's pretty much, if it's written, I like to follow an author. So if it's written by Michael Moorcock, I probably have, well, not some of the later stuff. Like some of his later, like 90s, 80s stuff, I really didn't care for it. But his stuff in like the 70s was great. Now, some of my favorite nonfiction books, basically books that I read for fun. I like reading educational stuff more than anything. Even though I don't agree with her worldview, I like The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. I like the book Evicted. Was a really good book too, even though I don't agree with both of those are very leftist books. Also Code of the Street. I'm trying to look at the name of the author. It's too far for me to see. It's Elijah Anderson. It's a great book. Thomas Sowell, obviously, The Vision of the Anointed, excellent book. His book also is Intellectuals and Society, great book. I really enjoyed reading some of the writings of Thomas Paine. Neil Ferguson's The Ascent of Money. I actually suggest you watch the documentary of that too. If you can find Neil Ferguson's The Ascent of Money documentary, you should definitely watch that. That actually got me to reading the book, is watching the documentary. So those are some of my favorite books. I have a library at the crib. I was trying to go off memory, but it was very hard. It was very hard. His second question: what is your favorite and least favorite one-off wrestling pay-per-view? Least favorite, probably Great Balls of Fire. I don't think I've watched that show since it aired. So I can tell you right there, I probably wasn't all that interested. Favorite one-off pay-per-view? Oh man. Hard to say. It's really hard to say because it's like you occasionally get these silly shows, maybe One Night Stand, I guess you want to say, but it was 2 of those. There was 2 One Night Stands, so maybe it doesn't count. So I would have to really think up a show. That it's probably not coming to me right now. Maybe one of the European pay-per-views that I haven't seen in forever. But I'm going to go ahead and say ECW One Night Stand, the sort of reunion show that they did, was a one-off show that I really enjoyed. All right, 3. Which wrestlers should not have won Money in the Bank, and who should have won instead? Well, clearly Brock Lesnar should not have won Money in the Bank, and neither should have John Cena. Dolph Ziggler should have won. I think the year that John Cena won, Dolph was hot, and we should have gone with Dolph. Now, when it comes to Brock, I know a lot of people would say give it to Mustafa Ali. No, I think no, but I think that them two, both of them, neither one of them should have won it. Damian Sandow shouldn't have won it. Corbin shouldn't have won it. So they have a history of making bad decisions with that damn Money in the Bank briefcase. But it's hard for me to say who should have won because I have to remember who was in those matches. I have to remember who was in those matches, and there's so many of them. There's so many people in those matches. It's hard to say, but I could just look at it straight up. Cena had no business winning. Neither does Brock. Neither does Corbin. Neither does Sandow. It was great for Sandow. It was probably the only thing he really actually achieved, but it still should not have happened. All right. His fourth question: how bad is Detroit? Well, I guess it depends on what you consider bad. I haven't looked at our crime rate lately, but I can tell you this. We live in mostly food deserts around here because the cost of running the supermarket is super high. When I go to shopping, I usually go to Aldi's because it's within walking distance of my house, and it's technically in Detroit, but it's right on the borderline of Detroit and Grosse Pointe. So I have no supermarket within, a couple of minutes of me walking. I used to have one, but it burned down. There's a lot of vacancies and a lot of vacant homes. Is very bad on that front. The government sucks. Our water is it's probably the best in the state. It's not too bad. Potholes, the streets are terrible. It's awful. Our public utilities are trash. It takes like 10 minutes for the police to show up if you call the cops for something. But the people generally are very polite. Like, Detroit has a very odd way of being somewhat, because most of the people who lived here, they come from the South, like grandparents and stuff. So they have Southern hospitality where they're very, excuse me, hey, how you doing, whatever. But at the same time, people have like a hairpin trigger of a temper. And you'll end up going from my bad, bruh, to you two trying to kill each other in 30 minutes. You'll have a nigga moment after you just politely said what's up to each other. And we're not even knowing one another. It's very weird in that way. But I think my side of town, which is the east side of Detroit, is pretty much worse than the west side. And pretty much everybody will admit that. So I stay on the east side of Detroit. So it's not necessarily the best. All right. His fifth question, which will be the final question. What are some of the worst name changes in wrestling? Well, it depends on what you mean by name changes. Do you mean a guy who didn't work in WWE and now he does? Because then we'd be like Skinner, because Steve Keirn became Skinner out of nowhere, just became Skinner. Or Wild Bill Irwin, who became the Goon. But if you're talking about somebody who we already knew and then WWE decided to change their name, well, I think a lot of them, the more recent name changes have been some of the worst. Usually they change people's names in the past and it somewhat improves. Now they change people's names to things that are far worse. The single name gimmick that they're doing now. They've been doing this for like 10 years now. It's never getting any better. Cesaro. Yes, we got used to saying Cesaro, but we don't know what the fuck a Cesaro is. The same thing with Rusev. We got used to it because we get used to this. But Theory? That's stupid. It's a stupid name. Just give him a different first name. Jack Theory. Matt Theory. Robert Theory. Robbie Theory. Or something, They change people's names for silly reasons now. But I think that the undefeated king of stupid names is Dolph Ziggler. It's the stupidest fucking name in the business. It's the stupidest name. It's not even a human name. Dolph is a moron for having that name. And I think that's the reason why he never became WWE champion, is because he didn't fight hard enough to get rid of that fucking name. If he could have went with Nikki Ziggler, because he was already known as Nikki. So just because he was in the Spirit Squad. So you could have just said, instead of Dolph, let's go with Nick Ziggler. It's not as bad. It makes him sound like the bully from American Pie or something like that, but it makes him sound like a human being. Nobody ever meets anybody named Dolph Ziggler. Dolph is a shitty name. All right? I think Dolph Ziggler is one of the worst names in the history of the business. Without a doubt. It's a terrible name. Like, it's one of those things that when he saw it on a sheet of paper, he should have just, nah, man, absolutely not. It's garbage. I don't want nothing to do with Dolph Ziggler. Even if you say he couldn't use Nick, I'd have used what's his brother's name, Ryan? I'd have used Ryan Ziggler. Something. It wouldn't have been Dolph, I can tell you that much. It was the shits. It's the shits. But some of those name changes, Kenny Dykstra, which comes from that same idea because he was known as Kenny from the Spirit Squad and he became Kenny Dykstra. Johnny Nitro going to John Morrison. I like Johnny Nitro much better. I think it fit him a lot better. I think that's a main event name, Johnny Nitro. And it tells a lot about his move set, who he is as a character and everything. He was a fast paced, high flying, that's what you think of Nitro. You think of nitroglycerin. You think of things blowing up. You think of explosions. And he had, sort of an explosive offensive style. Nitro was perfect. Then they changed it to John Morrison because he looks like Jim Morrison from The Doors. It's shitty. It's too normal. I like Johnny Nitro. You should have never changed it. So some of those are the worst. And that's all you asked for was the worst. Salvatore Sincere was another one. It was awful. What's even worse is they had Mark Mero embarrass him. You're Tom Brady. Like, oh, come on. Like, I know who the fuck Tom Brady is. I don't know who that guy is. I know Salvatore Sincere is, though. I don't know who the fuck Tom Brady is. Oh, whatever. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.